talking about deregulation the other day and the effects that it had on the trucking industry. Has deregulation hurt us as an industry? Initially, we all thought it was a great idea because when it was regulated, the government owned the trucking companies or controlled them, and that wasn't a very fair practice. When they deregulated, we all thought, great, government's getting out of the trucking business, we're going to get to run it ourselves. I, for one, went out and got my own operating authority. Initially, the freight rates dropped a little as more and more guys got into it. The consumers benefited from this, but as time went on, the real benefactors were the shippers. They ended up taking more and more advantage of the cheaper rates. Their volumes increased, their shipping increased, but our wages didn't increase accordingly. So at the end of the day, the shippers really won from deregulation. As time's gone on, we've seen that deregulation now in the long term has hurt us because the wages are low. They haven't kept up with the cost of living, and there's been no one to patrol that. The big trucking companies have gotten bigger. Their CEOs are making millions every year, and the drivers aren't making any more money than they did in 1986. So it's hurt the bottom guy and helped the top guy, and that's kind of big business. That's kind of the nature of it. So in the long run, deregulation has hurt the driver, the truck driver. His wages haven't gone up and haven't kept up with the cost of living. And they say there's a driver shortage now, and that's due to deregulation. There is no driver shortage. There's a shortage of guys that are willing to drive for what the trucking companies are paying. That's the truth of the matter. If you paid everyone what they were worth, there'd be no shortage of drivers. It would be a good job again. It would be a job that allowed you to live as a middle income family rather than a low income family. Deregulation was basically the government that had regulated the trucking industry and who dished out the licenses and said who could haul what for how much. The government decided to allow carriers, more carriers, to apply for their own operating authority, dictate and control the rates they asked for freight movements and that type of thing. It was the government stepping back and letting the trucking industry run and manage itself without government oversight. That was truly what deregulation was. And initially, it was good. In the long term, however, we've seen that it was harmful to the trucking industry because the wrong people ended up controlling the bulk of the money. Where do we go these days? Because of deregulation, they say that everything must really crash before it corrects itself, and I'm afraid that deregulation is going to be one of the factors that literally have helped collapse the trucking industry as we know it. It's almost there now, and it's to the point where nobody reliable wants to drive a truck anymore. There's no pride left in the industry, and the big companies are just filling the seats with bodies. Anybody with a pulse can now drive a truck, but that whole thing's just going to end up collapsing. And I think the industry as a whole is going to have to collapse, be flat, and then build itself back up again to where trucking pays a decent wage before they can get professionals interested again in truck driving for a living. I'm not sure over what period of time this will happen. I'd say we'll see the collapse of the industry as we know it within the next 10 years. How long it will take to rebuild it, I have no idea. That's anybody's guess. But the economy needs transportation. The economy needs freight to move. So if the powers that be are clever, they'll work hard to correct it as soon as possible. How are we going to correct this problem and get the trucking industry back on track where it's profitable for the drivers again? the whole industry is just going to have to come to a screeching halt, basically, and trucks are going to sit in lots all over the place until industry gets the idea that, hey, we've got to pay these guys a whole lot better. I don't think you'll see an immediate correction in our industry. I think it'll come to the point within the next few years that trucks are just parked in their yards all over the nation just because nobody is willing to drive them for the price the transport companies are willing to pay. And I don't think we'll see any improvements until we hit the rock bottom and industry realizes that, hey, we've got to pay these guys a whole lot more to get them to come back to the trucks, that they are so far behind in their earnings that they're not even considering a few cents a mile to get back in and drive again. It's going to take a raise to bring us back to the middle income. And that's a big, big, big jump from where we are right now. And I think that's what it's going to take to get the industry back on its feet after it collapses. Because nobody will do the job if it's not going to pay what it's worth. It's as simple as that.